Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're listening to Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
So, on today's episode of Eating W's, we have some news recaps from the past 2 weeks, as well as where we think some of the free agent wide receivers will land now that we are post-draft and post-free agency and coming up on training camp and stuff like that. We're going to give predictions on where we think some of the top guys will still land. But first, just a quick update. We, of course, did not have an episode come out last week. We had a little bit of scheduling issues because I went on vacation for most of the week, and also, there just really wasn't news.
There wasn't a whole lot that happened.
So we just kind of decided to not have an episode, an impromptu bye week, but we are back this week and ready to talk, so let's jump right into it. So starting with some of not last week's, but the weeks before that news, the Chargers signed Kyle Van Noy, so pretty much just fully replacing their defense at this point. I don't know if there's going to be anybody left from last year.
The only one
at this
still
point.
left is Derwin James, pretty sure.
Who didn't play last year.
So it's all new across the board.
Pretty much just going to be a whole new team. And also the Giants cut ties with cornerback James Bradberry after not being able to find a trade partner for him. And that adds a very interesting addition to the free agency market late, because to this point today, we are recording this on Tuesday, the 17th, no one is yet to sign him. So pretty interesting there, and kind of surprising to me. There's a lot of teams in the NFL right now that are pretty cornerback needy, and then now we get this, not elite, but very good, I'd say an almost superstar corner out on the free agency market.
He's a Pro Bowler.
And no one's picking him up. So very interesting there, but we'll see how that situation works out in the near future, I'm sure. So now moving on to some of the a little more recent stuff from last week. The Bears signed former 49ers wide receiver Deontay Pettis, which is not a huge signing by any means. Deontay Pettis was not a big name, but this is somebody who came out of the 2018 draft class, a receiver still.
Second-round pick, I'm pretty sure.
I think a second-round pick by the Niners, so still very young, and he hasn't really been able to get anything going, but he's also been in an offense that far from focuses on the pass, and he's had Jimmy G this entire time he's been there. So they haven't really put him in the greatest situation, and I'm not saying that the Bears is the greatest situation, because it certainly isn't
any better, but
because it certainly isn't a great situation by any means, but it actually is a better situation for him, because with that kind of weak depth chart, there's a little more of a chance that he moves up and can really prove himself, because he showed some flashes with the Niners. And I think he might end up being probably not a starting guy for the Bears, but definitely a pretty solid rotational wide receiver in that offense.
Add some depth to that wide receiver room. So
certainly, I like to see this by the Bears, because they're not getting any huge name guys, but they're picking up a lot of small pieces to try to help out Justin Fields, which is something they didn't really do for Trubisky, if we want to be dead honest, aside from maybe like the Allen Robinson signing, but. Yeah, so I'm happy to see that they're trying to help Justin Fields out a little bit, especially with that offensive line. That poor kid was running for his life last year. Next up, Jerry Hughes, the edge rusher formerly of the Buffalo Bills, signs a 2-year deal with the Texans. So the Texans are trying to improve their roster a little more, get a veteran on that defense, so I love to see it.
Veteran piece for Lovie Smith, that just makes too much sense for him. That's a good pickup.
Certainly. Trying to help him out with that pass rush a little bit, because I want to say they were bottom 5 in the league last year, if I'm not mistaken. And then the Raiders trade wide receiver Bryant Edwards, as well as a 7th-round pick of theirs, to the Atlanta Falcons for a 5th-round pick, in the 2023 draft. And this is another great pickup of a receiver who hasn't really gotten a chance to prove himself, but is still very young and has a chance to explode. And I really like this pickup for the Falcons. I mean, getting that 7th in the trade from the Raiders as well, they only lose 2 rounds in the draft pretty much, and get a 2020 guy who really showed some flashes last year after in the absence of Henry Ruggs and that Raiders offense. So now he's going to go there with Mariota and try to help the Atlanta offense out a little. I really like that pickup.
I like it too. I think Atlanta possibly got a number 1 receiver. I know that they were looking at him as the number 1 before the Raiders got Devontae Adams. So, I mean, he has number 1 potential.
Certainly. this is probably my favorite pickup from the past 2 weeks. I know there isn't a bunch of them, but I even told Callan a little bit, you can attest to a little bit, that when the Henry Ruggs situation happened last year, I kind of said, they got this other 2020 guy, Brian Edwards, who's not going to come out and be a superstar by any means, but he's going to be a really solid piece and finally get his chance. And, he did decent. He was a little underwhelming even for what I expected, but he did enough to show that I think he really has some promise. And if he can just get himself in a good system and actually get some looks, which is something he should certainly do in this Atlanta Falcons offense, because you want to talk about a weak depth chart. That is a weak depth chart. So I'm happy and excited for him to finally get that chance. And then finally, the New Orleans Saints sign a receiver, not quite a young one this time, but they pick up Jarvis Landry on a 1-year deal worth up to $6 million with incentives. So not quite the same situation as the last two with a young, promising receiver,
Right.
but they pick up a veteran guy who has been in the league for a while. I want to say he's 29 and has really proved himself. He's never found himself as a true elite wide receiver 1 role, but he's been amazing in that wide receiver 2, even sometimes wide receiver 3 role, and a consistent baller throughout his entire career, from Miami to Cleveland even to now. So
yeah, and he goes home to he's from Louisiana,
went to
played
LSU.
at LSU, so and New Orleans picks up a couple of LSU guys in Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry.
Certainly. That's just great for him. I'm really happy to see that. And something that Jarvis Landry really always brought to the table, especially in Cleveland, was leadership. So now that the Saints have some younger guys like Chris Olave, and Michael Thomas isn't younger by any means, but they have a lot of kind of rotational depth
Landry.
guys. Yeah, younger than Landry, and they have a lot of rotational depth guys who are younger than Landry that I think will really help to have that leadership veteran presence. So now, of course, the wide receiver free agency market, or the free agency market in general, I should say, is kind of getting a little thin at this point. A lot of veterans left, but one position that Cal and I think is still very promising and has a lot of talent left to tap into is the wide receiver position on the free agency market. So there's a lot of guys we could talk about here, like T.Y. Hilton, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, the list goes on and on. But we want to talk about who we decided were kind of the top 3 wide receivers left on the free agency market and some of the landing spots that we talked about and decided that they might go to. So we'll jump right in with Julio Jones, because we think that the best landing spot for Julio would be the Packers.
I think it would be the Green Bay, not just for fandom, being a homer, but I also think that it fits schematically because of Matt LaFleur's system, and that he was with LaFleur when Julio Jones was with LaFleur in 2016 when they had their Super Bowl run.
Yep.
He was on there. He was on the coaching staff.
Interesting.
So I think that he would fit right into that offense perfectly.
Yeah, that's a nice little tie-in there. And Green Bay has a lot of kind of, well, they of course have a obvious hole at the wide receiver position to start it off, but they have a lot of kind of quicker, smaller, younger guys. So it'd be really nice to get this just big-bodied athlete who's also can be a leader and a veteran presence
And
in
that
Julio
too.
Jones.
That's a big part that's missing in the locker room right now, because Devontae was that leader, especially at the wide receiver position, and now we don't really have that number 1 leader in the wide receiver spot, so Julio would fit that role perfectly.
Definitely. And when Julio thrived in Atlanta, he was the main wide receiver in that offense. He was the number 1. He was the leading guy. And then you could tell that, of course, there's other factors that went into it, just some age and some injury and stuff like that. But when he went to Tennessee and he wasn't that number 1 guy, and he was kind of playing that wide receiver 2 or 3 role with A.J. Brown taking over that number 1 spot, you could tell he just wasn't comfortable. It wasn't what he's used to. So now that I think he's going to go to Green Bay and kind of get to be that main receiver or number 1 receiver in that offense, we might see a little bit of a revival of his.
Resurgence.
Kind of what...
Shades of Moss and Brady in 08.
Exactly. Kind of what he used to be, and he can really play to his strengths again in a new offense, especially with an elite veteran quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. That'll help him out for sure. So next up on this list, we have Odell Beckham Jr. Now, Odell is still a very good receiver, even at 29. A little younger than Julio, but still a little older compared to other receivers in the league. But the thing that kind of makes his situation unique is the fact that he, of course, tore his ACL in the Super Bowl, so he will likely miss
at least half the
I'd
season.
say at least half of the next season. So whoever picks him up now or waits and picks him up later is going to have to factor that in, that they won't have him until a few weeks in. So we kind of decided that we think that he would actually just go back to the Rams. Now, of course, if he were to go back to the Rams, he would have to take a big pay cut because they, by no means do they have much cap room at all. But he got that taste now. He got to play a little bit in the Super Bowl. He got his ring. He wants to run it back, and he wants to stay healthy for the Super Bowl this time, which of course sounds stupid to say because of course he does. But, he wants to go back there and get that chance again and relive that moment and hopefully not have to leave the game this time. So I think he would be willing to take that pay cut and stay a big-time receiver in that Rams offense, especially considering now that they got rid of Robert Woods this offseason, the Rams did. That wide receiver 2 role that he took over for Robert Woods is wide open again. So
yeah, I think it would really add to that wide receiver room and be a late season addition, just kind of like it was last year for the Rams. Be kind of like deja vu a little bit.
Certainly. And then now for our final wide receiver and youngest wide receiver on this list, we have Will Fuller, the speedster. Now, this poor guy just gets hurt constantly, which of course any free agent left that's under the age of 30 probably has that knock, and that's the reason that they're still a free agent. But Will Fuller is a guy who I think can really still be a piece in an offense. I don't think he's going to go anywhere and be a wide receiver 1, of course, by any means, but he can still be that deep threat, take the top off the defense piece. So Cal and I decided that we think the best place for him would be Kansas City.
I believe so. They need to replace that deep threat that they lost with Tyreek Hill. And I know that they did sign Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but if you remember, when the Packers were trying to acquire Will Fuller, they still had Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So the idea of them playing together has been discussed before.
Yeah. That's actually a very interesting combo that I would like to see, with having those two guys be your deep threat and then have a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster be more of your possession, shorter route guy, because though they are both deep threat receivers, MVS and Will Fuller, of course, they are two very different deep threat receivers. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is a deep threat receiver in the fact that he's not quite as fast as Fuller, but he's going to get down there and just be bigger than those corners and safeties and win the jump ball. While on Will Fuller's part, he's a little smaller and he doesn't have the best hands, and he's not going to go up and get that jump ball. And MVS doesn't have the best hands either, but you get what you get. But he's much faster, and he's more just going to toast his corner and run by the safety and win on the deep ball that way. So that would be really interesting to see, especially with a guy who can launch it and has the arm power like Patrick Mahomes does. We saw in the Super Bowl a few years ago when they went against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that the Kansas City Chiefs receivers do drop the ball a lot.
They do have
Mahomes
some
struggled in the Super Bowl with pass rush, and when he did get the ball to his receivers, they dropped it half the time. So it's ironic that they pick up a guy like MVS and maybe pick up a guy like Will Fuller, two guys who have had a lot of catching issues in the past. But it would be interesting to see how they mesh and how that synergy works between those two deep threats, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good combination. I think it'd really work.
Certainly. So I guess that's it. Again, not much news this week. That is news from 2 weeks, and then the little segment at the end. So we are kind of in the lull of the off season, and we are just terrified passengers on the roller coaster of highs and lows of NFL news. So hopefully with training camp, the news kind of picks up a little bit more, and I'm sure it will, or at least we can pick up a little bit more and talk about what we think teams will get out of training camp. And we'll probably be doing a video again at some point on who we think the starting quarterback of all 32 teams will be.
The starters.
I don't know if that'll be soon or maybe a little further down the line, so we can see where the QB competitions and injuries and free agents
closer to training camp.
But yes, that will be a video eventually, and one that I am very excited for. That was one of my favorites that we did last year. So make sure to stay subscribed and like and comment on this video if you liked it or have anything you want to say or any suggestions for us to do a video about.
Any segments you'd like to see?
Yeah, certainly. We would love to see that because, as we mentioned, there is not much news happening.
Not a whole lot right now, but we try our best.
Exactly. So until then, don't forget
to eat the W.